All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Carrie Potter. I am an educational support coach with Family Matters Parent Training Information Center. So today we are going to talk about charting my course, Leading the Way in IEPs. So if you're not familiar with, you may have heard of student-led IEP meetings, I guess. So today we're going to dive into how student-led IEP meetings empowered by Charting the LifeCourse tools can really revolutionize the transition planning and advocacy for students with disabilities in the IEP process. So I would say feel free to jot down any questions you might have, or you can type them in the chat. You do have ability to type in the chat so that I can see it, or Abby Mars is on here in the background. She's also an educational support coach, so she'll be kind of monitoring that and helping me. But yeah, keep track of your questions. We'll have time to address questions at the end of today's presentation. Please keep in mind that you will be invited to complete a survey at the end of today's presentation. There will be a QR code available toward the end of the presentation, allowing you to access that survey. So please take time and complete that. Your honest feedback is really helpful to us and our grant. I do want to say that the contents of this document, this presentation, were developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. However, the contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you shouldn't assume endorsement by the federal government. I also want to say that Family Matters Parent Training Information Center is not a legal service agency. We cannot provide any legal advice or legal representation. So any information that you receive from Family Matters today or at any time is not intended as legal advice and should not be used as a substitution for legal advice. So I want to just explain a little bit in case you're not familiar with Parent Training and Information Centers. So Parent Training and Information Centers, or PTICs, are federally funded organizations. We provide free support, training, and information to families and children with disabilities, or families of children with disabilities. These centers are authorized under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. We're here to help parents understand and navigate the special education system. PTICs serve families of children from birth through age 26 and offer assistance in a variety of formats, including workshops, one-on-one consultation, and online resources, just to name some. That's not an all-inclusive list of what we do. Currently, there are 2 parent centers in the state of Illinois. So if you're needing assistance, Family Matters covers 94 Illinois counties. FRCD covers the remaining Illinois counties in the Chicago region. So those 2 PTIs are listed on your screen. You can find contact information for both in the chat. Okay, so you can use the QR code on the screen to access slides from today's presentation, and there is a handout. So feel free to take a photo of that or access the slides and information using that QR code. I'll give you just a second to do so. Again, this webinar is being recorded. It is going to be archived on the Family Matters website. So feel free to go back and review it, or if you think it might be helpful to others, feel free to lead them to our website to review that. Okay, so today we're hoping that by the end of the session, you will take away an understanding of the purpose and benefits of student-led IEP meetings. We're going to explore how Charting the LifeCourse tools support student involvement in the IEP process. The Charting the LifeCourse website will be implemented in the chat, so you can copy that. It is listed here on the screen as well. We hope that you walk away learning strategies for preparing students to lead their own IEP meetings and also discover real world examples and implementation ideas. Okay, so when I say IEP, what is the first word that comes to your mind? And you can take a moment and type that first word that comes to mind in the chat. I'll give you a second to do so. Okay, so I'm seeing words like plan, paperwork, and acronyms, individualized, stressful, educational program for accommodations. Those are all great examples. A contract. Okay. So yes, those are all great examples. So when you think about, I just wanted to share this visual word cloud. Um, some of what you shared is on this word cloud. There's a lot of different words that can come to mind, or a lot of different feelings that come to mind when it comes to IEPs. So yes, IEPs can be stressful. They may be stressful for professionals, parents, family members, the student themselves. Um, you think of accommodations, you think of student when you hear IEP because that plan is written for that student. You think of services. It may be confusing. So there's tons of different words that can come to mind when you think of an IEP. But you can think about the words, like what word came to mind for you, or what words other people shared, or what you see on the screen, and think, how do those words, which words resonate with you? Are they positive? Are they neutral? Are they more challenging? And just think about how these words reflect a student or a family's real experiences. So when you think of these words, it may be easy if you're a parent to think of, yes, I've been confused at times, or a student. I know students can be confused with the IEP process. It's about them, but they don't always understand it well. So, um, this slide just kind of helps set the stage for a deeper dive into how we can shift perceptions by centering student voices and equipping them with meaningful tools for advocacy and planning. I want you to think about the most recent IEP meeting you've attended and consider the questions below. You can type your answers in the chat. Who participated the most? Who participated the least in the meeting? How do you define participation? So when you're thinking of who participated the most, the least, and how you define participation, you want to think about who those team members are. The student can be a team member, parents or caregivers, family members, professionals like have to have an LEA, special ed teacher, general education teacher. You might have related services providers. So people are sharing a case manager. So yeah, the case manager, this person saying the case manager participated the most, the student the least. Um, and it really depends on kind of what approach is being taken to the IEP process, who you may see participate the most or the least. But I think often it can be the student who we see the least um, participation from. And it can be an intimidating process for a student to be involved. So we want to consider, the IEP meeting is about the student. We want to build their participation in a meeting. And we really want to think about how we can consider intentionally increasing meaningful potential or student involvement and participation in future meetings. So I said earlier that, there are specific team members for the IEP. I wanted to review who is required and recommended to be on an IEP team. The parents of a child with a disability are critical partners who know their child best. They're an equal member of the IEP team. There should be not less than one regular education teacher of a child if they participate in general education. They help ensure that the IEP works in the regular classroom. They can speak to that general education environment curriculum. There should be not less than one special education teacher or provider who knows the child's needs and services. You also need a representative of the local educational agency or the LEA who's knowledgeable about resources and does have the authority to commit to services. You need someone who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results. So it ensures that data guides goals and services. So, if a psychological evaluation was completed. You would want the school psychologist there, things like that. You need somebody who, at the discretion of the parent, I guess there should other individuals, at the discretion of the parent or the agency or the school, other individuals with knowledge or special expertise about that child could be present. And this could include related services providers. Um, you know, it could be an outside provider the family's connected with, that serves the child or knows the child. So, as a family or a school, you have the right to determine if other people might be helpful in that meeting. And then, whenever appropriate, the student with a disability themselves, especially that can be important for transition planning. And transition in Illinois starts at age 14 and a half. Okay, so the student is not just an observer, they're a critical member of the IEP team. So this means that their voice, their goals, their preferences should really shape that plan, that IEP. In Illinois, transition planning, like I said, formally begins at 14 and a half, and continues until that student graduates. And then student participation in these meetings really kind of helps prepare them for adult life by building self-advocacy skills, decision-making skills, things like that they will need as they exit, high school and enter adult life. So I want you to think about different ways to meaningfully involve students throughout this process. Even before the age of 14 and a half, you can start. It's never too early to start. You want to help those students gain confidence and ownership. It can be intimidating to walk into a meeting full of people. So, just think about ways that you might meaningfully involve students in the IEP process and make them more comfortable with that. And you may think about what is too early or too late to include a student in their IEP process. If you have thoughts on that, you can enter that in the chat. What you think is too early or too late. Okay, so somebody's asking, can I add my son's therapist to the IEP team who didn't do an evaluation? So if your son has an outside therapist, and you feel like it would be helpful for them to be invited and participate in the IEP meeting, you could request the district invite them, or you could invite them and let the district know that you have. I mean, that's somebody who has knowledge about your child. So I believe that would be, acceptable. So somebody is saying it would be really advantageous, or yeah, if there was some kind of, sorry, the chat moved on me, some kind of accreditation for a family advocate to have at IEP meetings. I feel like sometimes the person can be very knowledgeable and sometimes they don't really know the law and can make things more heated. Okay. So yeah, I think if you're going to have an advocate at a meeting, there's a good document from Cadre that talks about kind of questions you can ask an advocate before you invite them to a meeting to get a feel for, are they a right fit for you? I would encourage you, we can send out that resource, but I think there are ways to interview advocates to try to get a feel for their experience, their position, or their approach to attending meetings, things like that. But yes, that could be added to the chat. We can look that up and get that to you. If not today, then we would send it out after the training. And I do want to say in the chat, you'll find there is a link to the Illinois State Board of Education's parent guide that was updated in May of this year. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. That's a great resource for understanding the IEP process, understanding transition in Illinois, things like that. The guide is broken down into a lot of different sections that are really helpful. So definitely check that out. Again, you can find that in the chat. And Abby did share that document in the chat for Cadre. Okay, so we want to think about the IEP process. So IEP skill development and participation leads to participation and high expectations about person-centered planning. So when you're trying to really involve the student, and think about involving the student and how they can participate, it can really lead to more participation and staff, having higher expectations, staff and parents having higher expectations about the student and using person-centered planning. Those all really help. Um, having our outlook as professionals and families really help build on our students' skills and outcomes. So if you look at this chart, this is from Iris. You'll find a link to this information and this resource in the chat. Um, if you look at this, students who lead their IEP meetings often become more confident, motivated, and prepared for life beyond school. That's just, kind of what research shows us. But if you look at this chart, although 94.5% of students, according to this, attended their IEP meetings, only 12.2% provide significant input into the planning process. So this really highlights the gap between presence and meaningful participation, and it underscores the importance of empowering students to lead or be involved in those meetings. So if we really look at this, you know, there is room for improvement as far as students taking more leadership and participation in their meetings. So research shows us that just like their peers, students with significant disabilities who lead their own IEP meetings are going to develop stronger self-determination skills and gain greater knowledge about post-secondary transition. All students benefit when we give them meaningful ways to participate, share their goals, and practice advocacy. So any student's going to do better or have better outcomes when we do those things. So just try to think about or consider when working with students or your own child strategies to support those students with more significant disabilities or any disability in contributing to their own planning, even if it might look different or require different supports. Some students might require more planning before a meeting, having notes typed up so they can participate and read from those notes. Sometimes, it's hard to think on our feet in a meeting, especially as a student, it might be overwhelming. So having to have time to sit down with a parent or a school teacher or some type of school staff to prepare for the meeting in advance and have your notes written out on an iPad or somewhere where they could slide through and keep up, that might be helpful to help prepare a communication device, things like that. There are multiple different ways to look at, helping a student prepare for an IEP meeting. There are many reasons that students may avoid participating in their IEP meetings. So we want to talk about barriers that students might face in joining their own IEP meeting. It may be that they aren't specifically invited, or they're overwhelmed or intimidated because they don't know what to expect. Maybe they are nervous about attending because they don't feel prepared. And it could be that, maybe attending an IEP meeting in the past has been a bad experience for whatever reason for them. They might feel anxious and self-conscious listening to a team talk about them. I mean, anytime we're being talked about, it can be overwhelming, even if it's for a positive reason. If you think about sitting around with a team of people talking about you, it can be overwhelming and setting goals for your future. And, with an IEP meeting, you're talking about how to help that person achieve goals, but you also have to talk about areas of difficulty, and that can be a lot to take in as a student. So that could be a barrier as well. And then a student may also be intimidated or avoid attending or participating because they don't have a plan in place to support them in participating. So, these are things to think of. If you see other barriers, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'd like to hear those. These are just some examples, but you may have experienced others. Okay, so as far as like participation time, what can we do to increase the students' participation time? If you have ideas on that, feel free to put that in the chat. I'd like to see what your ideas are before I share. So someone shared that I think that is key. Let's see, make sure I'm reading that correctly. Have questions prepared, specifically engage the student. That's a good one. Um, I think it's key to student participation, a plan for how they will participate. It could be what part of the meeting they'll lead or what information they will provide about themselves. So preparing them, helping them plan that out prior to the meeting. Those are both great examples. So I appreciate you taking time to share. So it might be, like you said, preparing a student ahead of time for the meeting, using scripts or sentence starters, practicing in class, or doing like role playing where the student practices participating in an IEP meeting can be helpful. Assigning students, again, roles, I think somebody said in a meeting, and celebrate small successes. In the IEP world, I think a lot of times, we focus on what areas need improvement, but when you see a student doing well and even making a small step forward and participating, really celebrating that success can help encourage them um, to move forward. Abby said, highlight the amazing things a student has accomplished or is working toward accomplishing this school year. That's great. It's always great to hear what you're doing well and what areas you're improving in. You may help students by creating a one-page profile or vision board to share at the meeting. So something I did with my daughter, she's out of high school now, but I did years ago, was help her create a one-page thing. It was nothing um, too advanced, just maybe a photo of her, what she wanted people to know about her, the things she liked outside of school, what shows she liked to watch, about her dog at home. Just wanted to share information about her, but she also shared what her favorite class at school was and why on that one page visual, and what her least favorite one was and why, and kind of what she found difficult. Also, you can share like things that may help the student finds that helps them be successful. And those things are building on that student identifying their own needs and strengths. And a lot of times when we work with students on encouraging them to take on leadership roles, you find a lot of times they're like, oh, when you really help them think of what they're good at, sometimes they don't identify that because they think, oh, well, I struggle with all of these things, but they don't really think about what they're successful in and what they do well in. So sometimes I'm shocked that, when you tell a student like, hey, you're really good at this, they're like, really? Nobody's ever told me that, or I didn't recognize that about myself. Um, so I think when they work on something like a one-page profile, it can help build those skills and help them identify their strengths and see that they don't always just need help, but they can give help too. Again, you can offer role play or practice sessions before the meeting to help them feel more comfortable, to get an idea of what that may look like. Again, use sentence starters or guided questions. Some students or even adults, it's hard to think of what to say on the spot, but if they know, like, I'm going to ask you this question, and you help them prepare their answer, that might help them be more comfortable with that meeting. You may provide choices about how they want to share. Do they want to share a video? Do they want to speak? Do they want to share something in writing? And maybe, this is how they're comfortable communicating, or look at what their method of communication is. And again, involve, family members in coaching and encouraging that participation, and really celebrate and recognize that student's efforts in leading their meeting, because that can be a big step for a student. Somebody's saying they appreciate how positive their special education team is. They really do a great job at highlighting the student's strengths, and that's great. I think, we are all there to help and encourage a student. So, there are a lot of great special education teams that really work towards, empowering that student and helping them navigate that process during transition and leading their IEP meetings. So I wanted to kind of cover just kind of what student-led IEP meetings are. Student-led IEPs aren't just about talking more in meetings. They're really about shifting ownership to the student, to their life and their future. So a student-led IEP meeting is one where that student takes an active role in sharing their goals, their preferences, their strengths, their needs. They may lead parts of the meeting. They might introduce team members. That might be overwhelming to them to introduce team members because It might be hard to remember all the names. They might present their own progress. Um, this approach is really just going to help ensure that the IEP is truly individualized and centered on that student. And it again builds self advocacy skills and really prepares students for adult decision making. It empowers them to have their own ownership over their educational journey. So, again, a student doesn't have to maybe participate in an entire meeting. They might build on, start with leading parts of the meeting or being present for parts of the meetings, and then building on that to being involved more in depth or taking on new roles in their meeting, just, as they're comfortable. I want to talk about why it matters. Students who lead their IEP meetings often become more confident, motivated, and prepared for life beyond school. So, although 94.5% of students attend their IEP meetings, again, we said earlier, only 12.2% provide significant input into the planning process, according to that information by Iris Center and Vanderbilt University. So this highlights the gap that's present between presence in those meetings and meaningful participation. But again, it matters because it really does build on those self advocacy and communication skills, preparing students for adults or, yeah, for adult life. Um, it increases engagement and investment in their own education. And then, it helps meet requirements for transition planning. So I do want to talk about Charting the Life course. That link to the Charting the Life course website should be listed in the chat. Um, but Charting the Life course tools help students think about the bigger picture, not just school, but their whole life across time and settings. So Abby and I have been able to complete Charting the Life course training online and in person and become facilitators in Charting the Life course. So we've learned a lot more about Charting the Life course and their tools and how valuable they can be. And, we like to introduce those to people so you can learn more about them as well. So the Life course framework, it supports person-driven conversations that are simple but can be deeply meaningful. You look at everyone has the right to live, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations. You want supports to be person and family centered, so you want them to be on that person's plan is about, and you want to plan kind of across that lifespan for that person, looking at where they are, what their goals and aspirations are, and helping them figure out how they might be able to attain those. So there are a lot of different tools that Charting the Life course has. These tools can guide students in identifying goals, needed supports, and their preferred future. So we'll explore kind of how to use some of these tools in IEP preparation. There is a life trajectory worksheet. There's an integrated support star. There are some one-page profiles, daily life and employment domain charts. So we will look at a sample of the life trajectory tool. This visualizes what a student's wants are and what they don't want for their future. It also promotes reflection and goal setting. So it really encourages students to dream and define what's important to them, and to be able to help share that. They could use a life trajectory tool to share with their IEP team members. And it can lead to more IEP team or IEP goals for that student. So it's something that you may do before, they even have their IEP meeting to help you kind of look at their goals. If a student wants to go to college, you may think that might help you if you do the life trajectory tool, or the student does prior to a meeting. It gives you more of an idea of their goals and what they want after high school. So if they do think they want to go to college, using this tool may help you look at what courses they may want to take in high school before they leave. So this is what the sample, or this is what the life trajectory tool looks like. Again, it really looks at what their vision is for what they want, what they don't want. All this stuff can be charted, and then, kind of making plans for how can we make that happen, or how can we help and support that student. So really preparation is key. you want to start early and build over time. So again, if you're using like Charting the LifeCourse tools, you might start before an IEP meeting, well before an IEP meeting, get used to those tools, take trainings on those tools, work with a student to complete those tools. Um, so you can get an idea of what that student's goals are. Using those tools can help open conversation. You do want to practice, self-advocacy in class and at home, at school. Um, Other staff and students can work on self-advocacy when you're at home. You can work on self-advocacy with your own child or even in the community as a parent or a caregiver. You have the option or the opportunity to, implement your student working on self-advocacy in places outside of the home. It might be, again, helpful to use scripts and sentence starters and role playing to help prepare that student to lead. But really, it's just, um, students don't wake up knowing how to run an IEP meeting. They need support and scaffolding and lots of practice. So again, we talked about when is it too early or too late to start? It's never too early to start. As far as student-led IEP meetings, we're seeing more and more in curriculum where students are starting to lead their own IEP meetings as early as early childhood or, as young as when they enter school or grade school. Um, and start small and build on that. But I think there is something to be said for that. The sooner you start with a student, the more comfortable they're going to be as they reach transition age rather than just being invited at transition age. That may be less overwhelming. So it's never too soon to start. But I think if you haven't started yet, don't feel bad. It's never too late to start either. So, if you have a kid in junior high or approaching that transition age, it's never too late to start either. Students can play a lot of different roles in an IEP meeting. Again, we said that there's students don't have to participate in the entire IEP meeting. It could be that they're there for part of it. It could be they're there for the whole meeting, but they're only going to play certain roles that they're comfortable with. It could be that they're introducing team members. It could be that they're there sharing their strengths and interests or presenting their goals and progress, or they might lead discussions on supports or services. They could do one of these or all of these. There is a poll up, so feel free to take that. Have you ever used Charting the LifeCourse tools? We have 94% saying no, I have not. 6% saying yes, I have. So, and I think if you want further information or training, you can definitely visit Charting the LifeCourse if you have questions about how you might implement things like that in your classroom or with your child. You can contact Abby or myself. We can help talk you through that further. Okay. So students can play a lot of different roles in the IEP process. As far as implementation ideas, you might collaborate if you're a case manager wanting to approach this with your students. You might collaborate with teachers and families or students. If you're a family member who thinks this would be really helpful for your child, you can approach teachers, your special education case manager, or your principal, whoever, and share information about student-led IEP meetings, or Charting the LifeCourse tools, things like that, and ask, to collaborate on that. If you're a self-advocate, you can approach your family, your teachers, school staff, and talk about wanting to lead your own IEP meeting. You can also, integrate student-led IEPs or Charting the LifeCourse tools into transition classes or advisory periods. And as you do that, just celebrate those student leadership milestones as students take on more leadership roles. It's, again, important to highlight those and celebrate those moments. You might run into challenges, but I think with any challenge, there's going to be a solution that can be found. You might find that students are shy or reluctant. If I was in school and needed to I didn't like things like public speaking, things like that in school, I was reluctant to some of those things, but you can always start small with the IEP process and provide coaching, to that student. Ask them what would help them feel more comfortable with taking on more leadership roles. And, another challenge may be time constraints in IEP meetings. So again, a solution to that, we know that IEP meetings are limited on time, but you can always prep in advance and assign roles ahead of time, kind of have an agenda so everybody kind of knows when the student is speaking and the student knows what roles they're taking on. That kind of helps with the flow of things. Let's see. There are different case studies from schools, I think that can be found online. We do want to share some different testimonials from different students and families. So, for example of a testimonial, a seventh grader in Illinois used a one-page profile and life trajectory tool to prepare for a meeting. That student was able to introduce members of the team. They were able to present a vision board of their dreams, and they discussed supports that they needed to succeed in math class. So that's one example of a seventh grader in the state who was able to use the life trajectory tool from Charting the LifeCourse to help lead their meeting and share different supports they saw that they needed for math. An example from a high school student, so a senior preparing for graduation presented their own transition plan during the IEP meeting using the Charting the Life Course Integrated Support Star. They outlined employment and post-secondary goals and also requested job shadowing experiences as part of their service. So they were able to kind of look at what they wanted for their future, use that support star tool from Charting the LifeCourse to really organize that information and share that with their IEP team. And again, when that senior was doing that, I'm sure they were building skills that were going to help them, advocate for themselves after they leave high school and enter adult life. A student testimonial, I never thought I could speak up at my IEP, but using LifeCourse tools helped me figure out what to say and how to say it. And now I feel like I'm in control of my future. So, these tools can be really powerful. I know another student that I've worked with in the past before I was introduced to Charting LifeCourse did more person-centered planning, and they did that and worked out a plan to present to their IEP team. And, when they attended their IEP meeting afterward, they said, I always knew these meetings were about me, but I never knew that I could speak up. So sometimes, as much as we tell a student that they can, whether we're a parent or a caregiver, professional, as much as we tell a student that a meeting is about them, um, until they really have that practice and more of that leadership role, maybe they don't recognize that they can really have a voice in it until they put that into practice and really make a plan to see what they want to share in their meeting. So I think it's powerful to involve students and see what the outcomes are. I've also seen where students ask more questions once they start taking a leadership role and being involved in that planning process, where they might ask, like in a meeting, I've seen a student ask, well, if I'm in this grade, why is my math score down here at this grade level? Can you explain that to me more? Where, maybe before they wouldn't have thought to ask those questions. Family feedback, parents have reported increased confidence and independence in their child after actively leading IEP meetings for a year or two. They notice greater accountability and understanding of educational goals. Again, students can sometimes help write their IEP goals. I've known students who, get adaptive PE services in school and maybe sat down and helped write what their goals were, and help plan those out. And then they had more understanding and ownership of that. And, when you help with something and have that more hands-on experience, it might help it be more meaningful and be more real to that student rather than just, this is something that's talked about in an IEP meeting where I may or may not be there. So we do want to say, students can lead meaningful parts of their IEP. they can be part of the IEP meeting and have meaningful leadership. There's another poll about confidence participation in IEP meetings. So you can say, I feel the question or the comment is, I feel confident participating in my child or student's IEP meetings and understand the process and what to expect. Your choices are not at all, somewhat, for the most part, or absolutely. Again, charting the life course tools are going to empower voice and vision. And again, you can start small. You don't have to do it all at once with so many things. Sometimes if we try to start too big, we get overwhelmed. The student may get overwhelmed. So you can start small, be consistent, and really celebrate that growth. I think you can start small, and if things are going well, then look at what can we add, you know, for that student to take on next. Is there another, can we build on their leadership role for them to do more? Are they comfortable with that? Can we ask them what other parts of the meeting they might be comfortable leading? And remember, it's not just a meeting, it is that student's future. The IEP is there to really help that student grow and gain skills, and prepare them for life after high school. So you're really looking at preparing them for the future. You always want to begin with the end in mind. There are resources on this slide. You should have the Charting the Life course website in your in the chat, and then there is another poll here. Sorry, I did not go over the results of the last poll. Have you heard of parent training information centers before today? So the answers are yes, I know what they do. I've heard of them, but I don't know much. Or no, this is my first time hearing about PTIs. Okay, so it looks like 26% know what parent centers do, have heard of us before, and know what we do. 32% I've heard of them, but do not know much. And then we have 42% who are saying, no, this is my first time hearing about parent training and information centers. So I would say if you have further questions about what we do or want more information, you can definitely check out our website, which is in the chat. It explains more about us. You can find archived resources or archived webinars on our website. You can find different information about our program, what we offer. You can contact our office if you have more specific questions as well. We would be happy to talk to you about that. But yeah, so that kind of brings us to the end of this session. We do have time for questions. So let me look.